Oh, the White House saying case closed on the Mueller probe as the focus now shifts to investigating the investigators and how the whole thing started in the first place. You know, Attorney General William Barr is looking into the origins of the case. This as House Intelligence Committee Chairman, Democrat Congressman Adam Schiff, slammed Barr's review of Mueller's probe as politically motivated. And Schiff wants to now keep tabs on what the Attorney General says and does. Schiff sending letters to all the heads of our country's intelligence agencies, asking them to share with his panel any materials that are handed over to the Attorney General. Here's the congressman yesterday at an event in California, keeping up his calls for Mueller to testify before Congress.
Bob Mueller said, I really don't want to testify, but he should. I think for this former Marine, there is one more service to undertake, and that is to testify before Congress, to answer not just our questions, but your questions. I don't think it's sufficient to speak for 10 minutes and drop the microphone.
So what does all this mean going forward? Alex Little joins us, criminal defense attorney, as well as a former prosecutor and former assistant U.S. attorney in Nashville. Good afternoon. As always. Alex, good to see you. You know what the critics are saying, that Barr misrepresented Mueller's conclusion on why he couldn't indict on obstruction of justice. But the DOJ spokesman says, though there is no conflict, then you have Schiff saying he's going to oversee and monitor the AG. What does that mean, and how does he do that?
Well, I think what Schiff is talking about specifically is he's concerned about this sort of IG, or the investigation that the Attorney General says he's going to do of the investigation, and whether he's going to be able to sort of pull up some dirt to dirty up how it began or how it proceeded. But I think the real news this week, the only particular news, was the fact that Bob Mueller chose to make a statement. He didn't have to make a statement. Nobody made him do that. It certainly wasn't a mandate for his position. And when somebody like that takes a sort of an extraordinary step outside of his mandate to talk to the public, I think we should take note. It's pretty clear he had two audiences. I think one was congressional Democrats, one was congressional Republicans. He's telling people like Adam Schiff, I'm not going to save you. I'm not going to be your savior, and I sure don't want to testify. I think he also was telling congressional Republicans, there's a lot in my report you need to look at, you need to read it, and you need to consider your constitutional duty about how to go forward and investigate it.
And he came under criticism, though, for saying that they could not clear the president or come up to that point of view in terms of obstruction of justice, saying that is unfair.
Well, I think the reality is, if there was no evidence that the president had done anything wrong, he could have cleared him. But he said he couldn't do that. And so to anybody who I think took third-grade reasoning, that would suggest that there's a real reason to believe the president could not be cleared because he's guilty, or at least is indicating that he might be guilty. And his answer there was very clear. I can't do that job in the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice doesn't indict its own presidents. We have a Constitution. The Constitution says when a president commits misconduct or is suspected of misconduct, you, Congress, have to do that. Right now, we got a lot of folks in Congress who don't want to do that.
And also in terms of Mueller not wanting to testify, I made it clear during his 10-minute speech. You know what he's going to do if he's called before them. He's going to say, read page 239.
That's exactly
read page 542. Congressman, Chairman, thank you. That's on page 451. I mean, what will that be like if he just says refer to this page and that? It's written about the report.
I think there's two pieces of this which is really interesting. One is he said it. He said, my report is my testimony. There's no way he's going to answer hypotheticals about if President Trump weren't the president, could he be indicted? That's not his style. He will direct them back to the report. The second side of this, though, is the media has done such a good job, and President Trump has been so insistent, and his allies have been so insistent that he was cleared. I mean, that was the whole charade of the first statement from the Attorney General, that somehow this report cleared him. And there's a good segment of the public that don't believe he's done anything wrong. And so when you saw the town hall where all these Republicans in a district in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with Justin Amash, came out and heard him talk about why he thinks there should be impeachment proceedings, it broke through to some folks in that world that there is evidence of wrongdoing. And so if Bob Mueller sat down and had to point out those pieces where the president has potentially committed wrongdoing, that may change the public perception of what's going on.
And others are focusing on what they say is the wrongdoing by the FBI officials and others at the beginning of this investigation.
Sure.
Let me have you listen to the Attorney General talking about his probe of how this whole thing started.
I think it's important that we not, in this period of intense partisan feeling, destroy our institutions. I think one of the ironies today is that people are saying that it's President Trump that's shredding our institutions. I really see no evidence of that. From my perspective, the idea of resisting a democratically elected president and basically throwing everything at him and really changing the norms on the grounds that we have to stop this president. That's where the shredding of our norms and our institutions is occurring.
Listen to his words very carefully. He says resisting a democratically elected president, although some in law enforcement say that they felt they had legitimate reason to investigate.
Well, look, Bob Mueller said himself this week that the Russians were trying to get this democratically elected president elected. So there certainly was something to investigate. I think, Attorney General Barr's conduct in the past few weeks particularly is going to go down in history as really shameful conduct. I mean, the statements about destroying institutions, he's talking about a president who repeatedly, demeaned the FBI, its officials at every level, and said essentially this was a witch hunt. It wasn't a witch hunt. It was being run by an incredibly competent and skilled investigator with service on both sides of the aisle. So I don't think these investigations that Bob Barr is hatching up are going to go anywhere. The real question is when people start to look at the facts, where's that going to lead? And right now it's in Congress's hands, and that's where you have to see what happens.
Well, some of the others disagree. Let me read you what George Papadopoulos has tweeted, of course. This is two of his tweets recently.
And this is the felon who was, in the process of communicating with the Russians, but I'm sure his tweet's going to tell us.
Yes, I know. He did plead guilty. The line to the FBI about having contact with a Russian agent. This is what he said, quote, "How the hell could I have a FISA investigation issued on me when I have never even traveled to Russia, let alone met a Russian official? Can't wait to see what's in the bogus warrant. Hammers coming down on the other side." America, remember this. The FBI under Jim Comey was trying to entrap Americans working for President Trump. Disturbing evidence from the Mueller report that I was being spied on for my legitimate ties to the energy business in Israel by the previous administration. Incredible spying going on. Alex, what would you say to Mr. Papadopoulos and others who take that tack?
Well, look, I would say the same thing I'd tell my children if they said our dog was a unicorn. I'd say, no, that's not true. That's a dog. Sometimes you have to be direct and you have to be forceful about the facts. And here, this is where the media, I think, really owes the public better service, because a lot of the things that are being said, particularly about the FISA process, are just flatly not true. The FISA courts are run by incredibly distinguished, long-tenured judges, most of whom at this point were appointed by Republicans. And so it's not as if they would allow some partisan hack investigation of a low-level staffer. There were serious things going on. The Russians were trying to infiltrate the campaign, and the FBI and our counterintelligence services had not only a right but a duty to investigate that. So, George Papadopoulos, I'm sure he's going to say whatever he can at this point to make himself feel better and to sort of stoke up some sympathy. But the facts are this was a legitimate investigation. It's produced some really stunning evidence, and the public and Congress are going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, and quickly, you've actually prepared a FISA
I have,
warrant.
yeah. So
what is it like? How many pages is that? And can someone who wants to go get after Trump, can they just get a judge to sign off?
You can't just get a police officer to run down the street and get a FISA warrant. These are incredibly detailed, the most sophisticated application required in government investigations. It's 400, 500, sometimes 1,000 pages of documents you've got to prepare for a very tenured senior federal judge who knows what they're doing. It goes through multiple layers of review at the Department of Justice. These are serious considerations that are made when they do such a thing, and it's inconceivable that such a thing could be politicized.
All right, Alex Little, who has prepared a FISA warrant. Alex, as always, thank you for your insight.
Thank you.
Of course.
I wouldn't want my words twisted like that, especially considering what you said was perfectly ethical, legal, and honestly the right thing to do, as you had a joint defense leading up to that point.
Well, I had an obligation as counsel to the president to find out what was going on. And I'm so glad Judge Sullivan ordered the transcript, because we now know the truth. And we also know that this entire report by Mueller is a fraud. And we're going to find more of these things. Isn't it ironic that this man who kept indicting and prosecuting people for process crimes committed a false statement in his own report? By taking out half my words, they changed the the tenor, and the contents of that conversation with Robert Kellner. And it's an outrage, and there's probably more of it.
Add to this, Professor Dershowitz, that in and of itself is an outrage, because you're literally changing the exact meaning of what the counselor said. number one. Number two, how embarrassing for Mueller last week to say, oh, I couldn't indict on obstruction because of a Department of Justice rule that doesn't allow or questions the ability of him to make a determination as it relates to whether you can or cannot indict a sitting president. And then you look at the team that he put around him with Andrew Weissman and company, all chronicled in Sidney Powell's License to Lie. And, Professor, you care about civil liberties. I care about civil liberties. This is every American needs to be concerned in all this.
This is a very, very serious issue. The distortion of the Dowd quote is very serious, especially since, remember that a report by a special counsel is always going to be one-sided. Therefore, you have to trust it because the other side doesn't have a chance to look at it and show what's wrong with it the way it would in an adversarial situation. If a lawyer made a representation like that to a court and said, this is the quote, and left out the crucial context, which showed, as John said, that what he discussed was not only absolutely proper, but obligatory for a counsel when you have a joint defense agreement to find out exactly what's likely to be used against your client. This is a very serious matter. We have to find out first. Nothing inappropriate. We have to find out first who wrote that paragraph.
Former FBI Director James Comey slamming Attorney General William Barr's Friday appearance on CBS News, tweeting out, quote, William Barr on CBS offers no facts. An attorney general should not be echoing conspiracy theories. He should gather facts and show them. That is what justice is about. This, as the attorney general continues to push ahead into how U.S. intelligence was used against an American campaign under the guise of the Russia investigation. Here's what Attorney General Barr said during a recent CBS interview, quote, I just think it has to be carefully looked at because the use of foreign intelligence capabilities and counterintelligence capabilities against an American political campaign, to me, is unprecedented. It's a serious red line that's been crossed. What was the process? Who had to approve it? Joining me now is former federal prosecutor Doug Burns. Doug, your reaction to all of this?
Well, those are serious words from the Attorney General. I mean, no question about it. This appears to be a serious issue. People have been saying that all along, going well back. The other side of the political spectrum saying that's a smokescreen to divert from the very real Mueller probe. But now the equation's changed. I know that sounds like a political soundbite for me. It's not. It's a legal point. Okay, the president was cleared of this narrative that they created for over 2 years, and now there's an investigation. What I find fascinating, to quote Professor Dershowitz, is what we call the shoe on the other foot test. So the very same people who were saying sunlight is the best disinfectant and the Mueller probe must be full and complete and exhaustive, now just breathlessly pivot and say, oh, we should move on, when their time is to look at the other side of the equation.
You know, Doug, and then you have former CIA Director John Brennan. He's now vehemently objecting to the president's decision to give William Barr authority to declassify information to find out exactly what started and what happened with the possible abuses during the Trump-Russia probe.
Well, that's my exact point, Liz. You know, and you've just reiterated. So here's a man, again, a little out of my normal legal role, perhaps, who went on television over and over and over to tell us that they're closing in. It is a crime. Crime, that's the key word. They're going to indict family members of the president. I believe he said that they already may have sealed indictments. And now he just breathlessly pivots to the point you just made, which is that he's objecting to taking a close look at an issue. I mean, it's breathtaking hypocrisy, honestly.